Hi and welcome back. Hope everyone is doing well today. So we are going to talk about clay pots and root tips today. I've seen several comments that say clay pots tend to dry out the root tips and stop them from growing. Currently, I have almost all of my cattleya in clay pots. I have found they are doing really well that way. I've got this one here, and then this one right back here that we're going to look at in a minute, that did nothing for the longest. I put them in clay pots and they're exploding with roots and growth and such. I don't know if the clay pots have anything to do with it, or maybe they're just mature enough now to do it. I also pulled out my phalaenopsis that I grow in leca. Currently she is sitting in her feed for the week. So it's about 250 parts per million of MSU fertilizer. So this side here, you can see the roots are going down, and that root is wet because it does touch the water itself. This side over here, I purposely made sure that that root had leca on it, and those pebbles, I've kept them dry because leca is, they're clay balls. And I'll put it up really close so you can see it is really, really dry. I have not, even when I flush her, I don't flush her on this side for the last month because I wanted to see if those dry pebbles would dry out the root tip. And if you look, that root tip is doing fine. Of course, it's going down into the media because that is where the moisture is and it's following the moisture. And because I had the pebbles on there, it kept it from becoming aerial. But I'm going to keep them on there because I'm going to continue the experiment after the video. So that root tip is doing fine. I'll fix it later. Then I have this one here that is still considered a seedling. Call her a teenager. She's big enough now she can be a teenager. She's not quite mature. But I've had her since April of 2020. And I have repotted her 3 times in that amount of time into plastic pots with almost the same media, except for I did add moss. This right here setup she's been in since October. When I put her in here, she had a few roots, and as you can see, she's now exploding with root growth all over. Plus, happily, she has 2 directions of growth. Can you see them? Let's see, there's that one, and then there's the next one behind it, and they are full of happy sap. I'm so happy I don't grow outside or leave my windows open too much because I'm afraid if I did, I would have a lot of bugaroos on all this happy sap, and I'd have to worry about washing it off. On this one, so this root right here was growing right up against the clay pot, and it kept going, and as you can see, that root tip is just fine. Now, this root tip, well, there it is. This root tip right here, it did stop growing right up. It's not even touching the clay pot. It's really on the bark itself, if you can kind of see that. I don't know if you can see that or not. So I don't know if it stopped growing because it was close to the clay pot, but it's not touching the clay pot. So as we all know, clay tends to wick moisture, and that is why I wanted to use them for my cattleyas, because they do like a quicker wet dry cycle, and I tend to overwater. I think they've helped me actually and not hurt me. Now this one is my Sagrique wax silk ball that I got from Paula at Hillbilly Orchids back in July. And when she came to me, she was finishing off this growth right here. And for the longest, didn't do anything, not the longest, but for a while didn't do anything. And I took a chance and repotted her just as the roots were nubbins. Get my words together here. I did give her quite a bit of seaweed at one point, which stained some of the roots. This one, and I may have to take the camera down just to show you. I will. Give me a second here. 1 second. We're just going to finish this with me standing up. It'll make it a little easier. But do you see all of her roots? This one here I broke off, so this root tip was my fault. I recently broke that one. I wasn't paying attention when I was watering, but she has extended out here. She's got all those roots right there, but I moved the bark because if you look at this root right here, can you see? It is growing right up against the pot, and that root tip is nice and green and continuing to grow, and the root itself looks fine, well, minus my seaweed stuff here. So, and it's at the top of the pot, so we can't use the argument that the moisture is keeping that root from growing. The pot itself is still a little moist down here. I did water them yesterday, so that is that. And then, and see, I almost broke that stem again. Have this one here. Let's see, this is the Patinera mix here. So this is the Patinera Dick Smith Paradise crossed with Horse Maxima. And I have had this one since April of 2020. And I put her in this pot in July. And as you can see, she is finishing off this growth. She had this growth here when I put her in the pot. And let's see if we can move some of the bark out of the way here and see if we see any roots. I don't see any right on top, but that's not what this is about. I was just being nosy. If you look here, this one, let's move the bark out of the way. There we go. Do you see this root is also growing right up against the pot, and it's at the top of the pot, so it's not like it's down at the bottom where there's still a little bit of moisture from watering it yesterday. It is growing flat up against the pot, and the root has a nice green tip on it. And I don't spray them or anything like that in between waterings. I know some people will miss their aerial roots. I don't do that. I don't have time for that. I water them and I look at them and then I move on. Then we have this one here, which has the ginormous name. So this one here is the RLC Chialin Super, Golden Super, crossed with RLC Hilo Grand. Again, look at the roots on this lovely, lovely lady. So she is actually finishing off this growth here that is throwing out just all kinds of roots there. And if we move the bark out of the way again, let me grab my skewer so I don't mess things up too much. Let's see, can we see it? I should have done this before I started the video. Here's one I can show you though. So this one is growing directly on the pot. It's actually stuck to the pot. Now it is starting to brown a little bit, so I'm wondering if it is going to dry out. But I really think that that is just some fertilizer burn. I will keep an eye on that. Now, on this side though, if we look down here, where, let's see, right? Do you see where it stopped? Where it was up against the clay? But now it's started the root over again. So maybe right there is where I'm talking about. So perhaps maybe the clay did dry out the root tip, and then now that root is just starting to extend. Or it just could be I over-fertilized and burnt the root tip that way. So what I've been doing, because I'm going to be keeping an eye on my root tips for, you know, them dying off in the clay pot for the next probably 6 months or so, just to see if it really does dry out the root tips. Because like I said, I don't miss them or anything like that, so that it's not like the clay pot stays wet for those root tips to continue to get moisture. I don't have high humidity in here. It's minimum, I think, 25%. And I think the highest it ever gets is maybe 45, and that's in the summertime with the AC running. And when I do run the humidifier, it never gets up above 50%. Now, my Horus Maxima here, let me show you the tag. My Horus Maxima, which is a cattleya triana crossed with a Walteriana. It had a root tip here, and as you can see, that root tip has stopped, and that root looks like it's going away. Also, if we turn it around, I lost 2 root tips here. And this is a plastic pot. It's still, this is the nursery pot it came with. Again, root tip, it just stopped. Nowhere near the clay pot. It's not even in a clay pot yet. It's still in the, like I said, original nursery pot that I got it from. I had a root tip growing out here, and when I went to pick it up, I heard, and that's the root tip down there. Well, it was down there. That little wet spot is where it was. I took it up. So I do know that they're going to attach themselves to the pot, just because once it dries out, obviously it's going to, you know, suck the moisture and it's going to stick. But does it dry out root tips? Because this is a plastic pot, and I have several root tips that have stopped growing in this plastic pot. So again, I will keep an eye on the ones that are in the clay pots just to see what happens, and I will continue also to keep the leca as dry as possible on this root tip here, just to see if it will grab the moisture from that root tip and keep that root tip from growing. Let me know down below if you grow in clay pots. I know a lot of orchid growers prefer the clay pots for the aesthetics of it, for the convenience of the extra wicking, so that if you do overwater, it tends to take care of that for you a little bit. Or if you have found that you don't grow in clay pots because your root tips were drying out. I'd be interested to know the average of how many grow in clay pots and how many stopped growing in clay pots because of that. Okay, well, everybody have a wonderful day. Go ahead and give the video a like, thumbs up, subscribe if you'd like, share if you feel like anyone will get value out of it. Continue to have a safe and wonderful holiday season, and we'll see you on the next one.